Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Word on the Snakebite. I'm your host Ross Deacon, and in this podcast we talk all about things venomous animal related, from venom research, venomous animal husbandry, animal conservation, herping, and of course snakebite and snakebite initiatives from all around this world. On this episode, I've joining me as my co-host.
Hi, I'm Ed, and before we start I have to do a few formalities. Any views expressed in this episode are the views of the guests and the host, not the facilities or company they work for.
So today we have joining us Arno Naude on the phone with us today, all the way from South Africa, where it's probably sunnier and brighter than it is here in the UK. So how are you, Arno?
I'm good. It's not that sunny and bright. The temperatures are down to about 20, 22, so it's a bit cold for us.
A bit cold. It's still warmer
We're meant
than
to
it
be
is.
getting 22 this weekend and we're all celebrating about it.
That's t-shirt and short weather for us over here. So we don't get this very often. But then obviously we haven't got the fauna that you guys have over there either. So unfortunately. So just so everybody, all of the listeners know, could you just explain a little bit about the job that you do, and kind of one of the reasons? I think that'll help explain kind of the reason why we have invited you onto the show.
Okay, I've got a company called Snakebite Assist, which is a company that we have in South Africa, which is one of the main things that we do is education. Not so much for the public, although we do quite a few of public courses. But I'd like to specialize more in the medical field and try and assist doctors, nurses, paramedics who will come into contact with snakebite just because they don't see it often enough. And when they do, it quite often presents very similar to other traumas, and they try and treat it like that, and then they make a bit of a mistake.
I think that's quite interesting, and we will definitely be touching more on that later as the show goes on. So, as well as owning this company, I know you have a strong interest in reptiles anyway, and you privately keep as well. So, how did you get into reptiles, and kind of what kind of animals do you actually keep in your own private collection?
I started keeping reptiles when, like most kids, when about I think at the age of 12, you start scratching around and you find lizards and snakes and stuff. And my parents were very supportive. They allowed me to keep snakes. Unfortunately, I lied to them quite a bit. So by age 15, I had a pair of rattlesnakes. I had a bedroom and stuff like that, which, is not quite the right thing to do, especially if your caging isn't up to scratch. But touch wood, I didn't get bitten at that stage, and it just grew on me. And then after that, you get known as the snake guy. So you've got to prove yourself. And so you learn more and more and more and more about reptiles, and you meet new people. And in that way, you actually have to teach yourself. Because back in the day, remember this, we're talking maybe like 35, 40 years ago, there wasn't really that much known about keeping snakes, or actually even much about the snake bites themselves. So most of that has had to be self-taught over time, just because I had to make sure if I go to a hospital, if I do get bitten, that I can help the doctors so that I don't end up losing a limb or a life.
That's actually really quite interesting. That a lot of the stuff that you just said, you've self-taught yourself quite a bit. So in the mainstay of your collections as you've grown up, have you mainly kept venomous animals, or have you kept quite a mixture?
No, I've kept a bit of everything. At the moment, I'm keeping more in the line of boas and retics, but I mean, I've still got things like black mambas and boomslang and cobras and wrinkles and puff adders, and I can't even remember this. There's shield nose coral snakes, and then I keep some Mexican beaded lizards as well, which I find quite interesting, and just a little bit of everything, I suppose.
That's really quite interesting. So, when you grew up, did you find that you kept more African-based species? Obviously, being in South Africa, I'm not 100% sure of what the reptile hobby kind of is like out there as regards to.
Yeah, that's a story on its own, because we weren't allowed to keep exotic snakes in South Africa because they believed that these snakes carried a disease called equine encephalomyelitis, and this would destroy the horse racing industry. So we weren't allowed to bring in animals. Everything, sorry, everything that was brought in had to be in quarantine for 2 generations, which is just ridiculous. So a lot of people smuggled snakes in because it wasn't illegal to keep them, it was just illegal to import them. And then things got out of hand, and eventually I sat down and researched this disease, eventually went to go see the state vet and say, look, it is possible to import these animals. We keep them in quarantine at a certain temperature for 30 days. This disease will have burnt itself out, and that opened the floodgates. And then we were allowed to keep exotic animals. So up until then, I'd more or less just specialized in indigenous species. And then once the floodgates opened, we had access to just about anything.
See, for us in Europe, we see some South African animals, especially, as kind of like holy grail animals. Like for me, renkels is a big thing for me personally, and I know for a lot of other people as well. And there's some other species that you have out there that we would just love. Another one for me would be Pomophis notistictus as well. There's just a few of them, but we really struggle to get them here. Because nobody can seem to breed them in captivity in Europe. Everybody struggles with a lot of with some of the more higher elevation snakes that are at higher elevation to get them to breed, really. So
yeah, it's a problem here as well. There aren't that many people breeding indigenous species. There are some guys who specialize, but then there are some of the common species, like for example brown house snakes and these sort of things, which are very easy to keep and breed. But some of the unusual stuff, especially the small adders, and then, like you said, the wrinkles, people don't have that much success with it. And the wrinkles is actually very easy, and I don't mind telling people this because I'm not in it to breed and export. But the problem that people make a mistake of wrinkles is they need a very cold night and a warmish day for the entire winter. They come out and bask during the day in winter, and if you don't give them that, you are never going to cycle them. They will never breed, and you won't ever have more babies.
Well, this is one of the things that you may have seen actually recently that I've released myself recently after talking to. I think you gave me some advice on it and talking to a few other people in South Africa and stuff. I actually got my Western Cape locality pair to breed last year for the first time, which was pretty an amazing thing, really, to see.
Especially that locality, because the Western Cape ones are almost, well, some parts they've already become extinct. For example, Cape Town used to have hundreds of wrinkles there. Back in 1930s, they would catch 14 on a good day, sort of thing, and now they are extinct in the entire area. So if you got some from the Western Cape, I know they're very pretty, and they are a bit more delicate. They do like the winters a little bit colder than the completely black ones. Yours are probably yellow and black.
Yep.
But once you've got them breeding, you're on a winning wicket there, because if you can raise the babies, they last forever.
Well, that's the issue I've had. I've unfortunately actually lost all the babies from that, and since then I've lost.
Toads. They prefer toads as babies. So if you can get them small toads.
I was trying frogs because we struggled to get small toads and frogs in Europe, but I was feeding frogs' legs. I had one feeding by itself, and I only got two from the clutch anyway, and then it was down to one within a couple of weeks, and then that one lasted a couple of months. But yeah, and then unfortunately I've lost my female recently, actually, through a breeding incident. As you know, they're quite rough breeders. And the male bit the female and hit her liver and killed her, unfortunately.
Because the thing is, you're going to need to get a female from the same locality. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. The ones, for example, in the Cape, Natal, and the ones in Gauteng are completely different. And a friend of mine's actually doing research at the moment on Runkel's venoms. And we found that there's definitely 2, possibly 3 distinct populations, not quite subspecies, of wrinkles found in South Africa.
That would be really interesting to really interesting to find out where that goes from there, actually, because
the wrinkles in Zimbabwe, are extinct. They've been looking there for the last, I think, 30 or 40 years. They haven't found a single specimen, and it was a very tiny population in the Chimanimani Mountains, and people have gone up there to look for them, and it seems like they are no longer.
That's a real shame, because that's definitely, see, in Europe we tend to have more of the Free State and the Natal and Eastern Cape seem to be the three localities that we tend to see more of in Europe, which my personal view aren't as nice as some of the other localities we can't get. But yeah, it's definitely a bit of a fascination of mine, and I will be getting some more localities in the next couple of months. Actually, I'm struggling to find
them legally. The big thing is a lot of people smuggle them out, and there's very few people who get them out legally. So there are some people who are breeding them, or there are some people who are legally exporting, but there's not that many of them. So if you're getting them from a specific locality, then more than likely that person will have the right paperwork to export.
That's the hope. I have to trust the importer that is the case in this case. Unfortunately, I'd love to import them myself from somebody that I know and do it that way, but it's quite a lot of paperwork and a lot of money that I don't have to put up front, unfortunately. So, kind of, you touched a little bit earlier on about your how you got into snakebite and such forth. So how did you transfer that into helping other people with their snake bites from yourself?
Right, it started way back. I was married to a nursing sister who worked at an emergency unit, and they'd get people coming in who'd been bitten by a snake, and quite often they still bring the snakes with them, even if they're chopped up. And she would phone me and say, "Come have a look. Can you ID the snake? Can you help the doctors?" And that's how I started with this. And then I just studied wherever I could get anything on snake bite and the treatment. And eventually I got to the level where one of the professors asked me to do a small talk at a medical university. And after the talk, he said to me, "You know more about snake bite than what I do. Would you mind lecturing the doctors?" I said, "No, fine, not a problem." And the first couple of times that I lectured, he was there and he tried to catch me out, and obviously he didn't. So he thought, no, he's not going to make a fool of himself, and he just has left me to my own devices. And since then, it's been almost 10 years now that I lecture for the fifth-year doctors. So I teach them about snake, also mark the exams for them.
That's really quite interesting. So it seems it's quite. Sorry, I just got a message. It seems quite like you've been quite self-taught through the whole process. It's kind of interesting that you've come into this not necessarily from a medical background as well, because obviously quite a lot of people who come into snakebite are obviously usually from a medical background.
That's where a lot of the mistakes are made. They come from a purely medical background, and because they don't know the snakes, or they've never actually researched the venom or the effect that the venom has on humans compared to animals, it does sometimes confuse the issues. And we have very few doctors who are specialists in snakebite because they don't see that many snake bites. At the moment now, we do have a national snakebite advisory group, which is a get together of medical staff and some paramedics, and then obviously people who know about the snakes themselves, who advise. And because of this, we've sort of moved people to a certain hospital, and the more people go to the hospital, the more experience they get. The better they get, more people go there. So it's a cycle that we're trying to develop, specifically because if you go to the wrong hospital, or you happen to catch the wrong doctor who has never worked with a snake bite in the last 20 years, he just looks at it and he treats it like a trauma. So he sees there's swelling and he thinks, oh well, fasciotomies or corticosteroids or ice or whatever they would do for a trauma patient, which in this case is completely the wrong thing to do. So it's more about having certain doctors who have an interest in snakes and snakebite, who then step up and say, well, look, send them to my hospital. I'll make sure I've got antivenom, And if I get stuck, I'll ask for advice from any of the other doctors or professors that we have on the group. So that's actually something which is working quite well. As we speak, there's a patient being transferred to a specific hospital right now who was bitten by Mozambique spitting cobra. So ended up at a hospital far away from here, and from experience, I know they do not have the antivenom. So without the antivenom, it doesn't really help sending them to a hospital. You know, it can work for mambas or for the big cobra, the other the neurotoxic cobras, because yes, you can put them on a ventilator, but for a cytotoxic bite, if you don't have antivenom, you're wasting your time.
That's one thing that I always find quite interesting. Obviously, you've got quite a mixture of animals really in South Africa. You're very, very diverse as regards to obviously snake types and obviously venom types because of that as well. So do you see that you have more bites from certain species, or is it quite broad and breadth across the species that you see?
Surprisingly enough, it's basically more than 50% of the bites is one specific snake, being the Mozambique spitting cobra. They are nasty. They're like a gangster on meth. Nothing scares them. They will bite anything that comes near them. They can spray venom. They can climb. They can swim. They eat each other. They eat their own babies. So they're really a bit of a menace as far as snake bites go, because our antivenom is actually not that effective with their specific venom. It does neutralize it, so we have very few deaths, but we have a lot of cell destruction, tissue, limbs being lost, and then obviously in some cases we get secondary infections, which then put the body into shock, and because of that the organs shut down, the person dies. But we don't see that many deaths from them, but we see a lot of that. So they take up probably more than 50% of the bites, and then the others, I'm talking about lethal bites now, because we get a lot from things like night adders and stiletto snakes, which are non-lethal, but they're still quite nasty. But then if you're looking at the Cape cobras, snouted cobras, forest cobras, mambas, boomslang, that sort of stuff, we don't see that many bites from them. And unfortunately with the mambas, generally when we find out about a mamba bite, the patient's usually not with us. They drop very quickly, and most of the mamba bites seem to happen far from medical centers, and usually within 2 or 3 hours the patient's just not going to make it from a decent bite from something like a big black mamba.
So, and I think that's probably where a lot of these myths obviously come from, surrounding black mambas as well. With obviously some of them that we've heard is that they sit on top of a hill and bite their tails to be able to roll down to get to people faster. They'll chase you, all this type of thing. And I think a lot of that has probably come from a lot of these people's experiences, obviously in more rural areas within Africa and South Africa.
Yeah, if you're walking up a mountain and a mamba's coming down the mountain because his hiding place is near you, at the speed that they come down over grass and bushes, and it can sometimes look as if the only reason how they could move that fast is because they're rolling, because these are not slow-moving snakes, these are fast-moving snakes. So people see this and then they start the rumor and it just gets worse. But the unfortunate thing is that in the cases where people do come across them and they do corner them, mambas are not shy to defend themselves. They will try to get away 99% of the time, and sometimes to the point where you can't believe that anybody ever gets bitten by them. And then occasionally they realize, look, they have to defend themselves, and that's when people get bitten.
I think we've both me and Ed have actually had experiences quite similar to a mamba being cornered recently. Well, mine wasn't recently. Mine was a few years ago. I know Ed's was relatively recently.
Last week or the week before.
Yeah.
Smaller female we've got, and recently she's kind of awoken. She was relatively docile. We've got a large male. He's quite old, and he's a very docile black mamba. Fantastic to work with. He's a bit stubborn, but such is. The female seems not to like me that much. She cornered me in the room and mouth open, charged, and that was the first time I had that from a mamba. It's quite
Yeah,
daunting.
that's not fun. Then
No.
I've had something similar where I've climbed on top of cages and sort of stood there shouting for a grab stick because you
Yeah,
don't expect to do that. And then other times I've seen them sort of climb out, come steal a rat off the trolley and climb back into their cage. So sometimes they're in a good mood, sometimes they're in a bad mood. They're like people, but if a snake has gotten to the point where it's becoming very defensive, then you need to look at modifying the cages or how you work with them, and expect it to do that more often now.
yeah, definitely. The female that we were just talking about, typically she's all right. It was just one day, so I think I'd caught her on a bad day, and she came flying out of the viv, and I had the bin ready, I had the bin lid. I was expecting her to play up. Um, no one was in the facility. I couldn't get my phone out. I had my hands full. And the only
Oh,
Lost you there.
Ed, are you still there?
Yep.
Oh,
Seems like we lost it.
we
But yeah,
lost it.
Ambas are inclined to do that. They will be very placid, and then one day they will just decide they're not going to play anymore. Usually when we get wild caught ones and you put them in a cage, you put in a hide box for them, and if you want to clean the cage, you basically just wave your hand and they go climb into the hide box and you close it and you clean the cage. But they, within a couple of months to a year, they don't do that anymore. They don't climb into the box unless they want to go in there.
Well,
So
this is something that Ed says at LSTM they have all four species plus the subspecies of Jameson's, and they tend to, majority will go into the hide box once the box that once the enclosure they're kept in is moved. However, there's a couple that will and there's a couple that won't. But I think it is you.
yeah.
Oh, you're back.
Sorry,
You're
my
back.
headphones disconnected. Yeah, we've got currently 5 Angrosperceps, 2 Viridis, 2 Polyepsis, and then both Jameson I, and a Karamosa. But the majority are very good to work with.
the Angusticeps, where are they from originally?
Tanzania.
Yeah, the Tanzanian ones are different to the ones from South Africa. The South African
Yeah.
ones are generally more placid. The Kenyan ones I've heard are the people that have worked with them locally have milked them, and they said the venom isn't even worth making antivenom from, and it was actually rejected because it's so weak.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I learned to handle in South Africa. That was my first interaction with venomous snakes, and the Angrosperceps I handled there were very easy to work with, very placid, as you said. The Tanzanians we've got, they're very sure of themselves, but they are quite flighty. When you open the cage, they'll either hide away or they'll just try and get away. The venom variation is very interesting. We currently have the Tanzanians, and I think we're expecting potentially South Africans later in the year, but we're expecting some more Mambas at some point, which will be interesting to see what they're like. I think off the top of my head, we're diversifying a bit. So at the moment, we have quite a large collection from Tanzania and Nigeria, and we're kind of getting more snakes from more areas with more collaborations that are built up through snakebite initiatives. So it'd be nice to be able to work with some South African snakes again. I personally loved working with them, and I do miss them, especially the boomslangs.
Yeah, the thing is, you need to make a comparison of the venoms when you get them, because even in South Africa, we've got 2 distinct results which will happen after you've been bitten. From one area in KZN where they occur, KwaZulu-Natal, they'll present like a cytotoxic bite, and in other areas they will show virtually no swelling but 100% neurotoxic. And what the reason is, I don't know, but it's definitely limited to specific localities. And apparently the Tanzanian ones are also more cytotoxic than neurotoxic. We've had some green mambas locally where we're talking neurotoxins that knock someone down within half an hour to an hour, which you won't get with the cytotoxins. So it would be very interesting if you could get specimens, just make sure exactly where they're from, and see if you can't get some from south of Durban and some way north up towards Mozambique. and just compare their venoms as well, because that's going to really be interesting.
Yeah, if we can get hold of them, that's the majority of the work will be a lot of the venom comparisons and seeing different toxins, and then to go on to hopefully be used in antivenom production, which is, as you know, quite an important factor at the moment, because we need to develop these new antivenoms. We need to have these new treatments available that can combat the range of localities, instead of just saying, oh, that was a different locality, the antivenom isn't prepared for it. We can just target directly the proteins instead of having to worry about locality-based antivenom effectively.
I think that's some of the issue with some of the West African, the West African issues, is the fact that a lot of the antivenom that they have are not necessarily locality specific to that country or to that place. So they're obviously seeing bites present in different ways than the norm, or what they'd say adversely, when in fact it's just a change in the venom toxins and proteins.
The other problem
is that
recently we've just had Wolfgang and them find these new, or split the forest cobras up into 5 different species. And someone getting bitten by a forest cobra from Nigeria who uses South African antivenom for that, it's not going to work, because they're completely different species. And although nobody's actually sat down and compared the venoms with each other, I'm pretty sure that they vary quite a bit between here and a place like Nigeria, all the way through. You've got all those other populations as well. So if someone gets bitten and you don't know what it is, then it becomes kind of difficult to say, but this was the effect of this venom and this antivenom didn't work, because you're not sure what it was.
Yeah, definitely. The South African antivenoms that we've got, we can work around, because we have our localities of our snakes. We can say this snake, the preferred antivenom will be Etitab or another product like that. It's for, say, Kenyan or Nigerian species, but the Southern African species will then be using Samir or South African vaccine. So we're quite lucky that we can effectively pick and choose depending on locality at my facility. But again, we're very lucky to have the collection of antivenom within the National Health Service, and have the resource of the hospital being 2 minutes away from us. It's not the same story out in the field, obviously.
And the other problem, or something that we've noticed now, is that we're getting antivenoms that are not made in Africa, and they are supposed to be covering something like 17 species per vial. And I just look at this, and the results that we're getting, feedback that I've got on that is just horrendous, because the countries buy it, places like Mozambique, Kenya is another one. They'll buy the stuff because it's cheaper than the South African antivenom, but then you have to use 4 times the amount. So at the end of the day, it's costing you twice as much. You might as well just buy the premium stuff and keep that. And I recently had someone's dog that was bitten, and they used antivenom, which is not South African. They were supposedly testing it, and they used 18 vials. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
And then you've got to take into account the side effects that can come from the wrong antivenom. So effectively, you've now got inadequate antivenom that will be preferred by people because it's cheaper, but produces more side effects, which will then have a negative effect in almost a vicious cycle, where the people will lose trust in the medicine. So they might not go to the hospital, so then they go to a faith healer. And then you get this kind of feedback loop where people aren't buying the antivenom because they don't have the trust. The antivenom production lowers. Then there's an antivenom crisis. Cheap antivenom will flood the market. Again, the trust disappears in the Western medicine, if you want to call it Western medicine in that sense. And you just keep getting this feedback loop until the antivenom producers of the premium products, they're not doing it because they just cannot viably make a profit on it. And then the market's flooded with, say, Indian antivenom that doesn't even contain any African snakes. But at $20 a vial compared to, say, $150, you can kind of see the attractiveness of it until it doesn't work.
Yeah, that is a problem that we have in Africa, is that we try and work out, yes, but can we bring the price down? Can we bring the price down? Even if we bring the price down to $50 a vial, there are numerous people who are going to get bitten who cannot afford it. With the SAVP antivenom, we usually use about 8 to 12 vials, and the people there's no way that they can afford it. Not even the whole family can afford it. So it's not just the poorer parts of Africa, it's even the fairly well-off people in South Africa. Some of them struggle because the antivenom itself is already a large percentage of the medical bill, plus then there's the ICU, plus the doctors, plus all the other adjuncts that they add in with the drips and everything. And it ends up, a snake bite is not cheap. It costs, a couple of $100,000, either rands or dollars, whichever way you look at it. And the people just cannot afford it. So they try something else, and they try faith healers, and they try all these other things, and it just doesn't work. But the bad thing is that about probably 60% of the people who go to the faith healers are healed because the snake didn't give them a decent dose of venom or it's non-venomous stuff. So, if they compare 60% to 40% who go see the doctor and mostly survive, they're going to go, but this guy's not too bad. 6 out of 10, that's good going. And
Yeah,
we all
definitely.
know what this placebo effect is. And unfortunately, we're still struggling with that even today with people, even doctors and vets. Let's be perfectly honest. I've had cases in the last couple of weeks where the doctor did this, and this. And I go, why did you do that? And he says, well, this is the 5th time I've done it, and it's worked every time. And I go, yeah, the other bites might not have been that serious, but it's not what you need. And me not having a doctor in front of my name, they just look at me and they go, well, why should I trust you? What do you know? And that's the sad part. So luckily we have doctors and professors and stuff that can back me up. And I just say, well, okay, phone so-and-so and ask them. And they'll say exactly the same. Sometimes they'll even ask me, listen, what must I say? And then so far, touch wood, on over 300 snake bites that I've been involved with, I haven't lost a single patient. So I don't think my record...
That's fantastic figures. That's really fantastic. And it shows the impact that this additional knowledge and the outreach of not just listening to doctors, listening to people who have the knowledge of working with snakes, who have the knowledge of how the snake's behavior works, all these integral parts make up the bigger picture. And it's not just teaching doctors how to deal with snake bites. It's teaching the doctors about managing the education, the potential side effects, the use of the drug, when to use it, involvement within the community. Yeah, how to use it, involvement in the community that brings the people to the hospital. So if you've got your doctors trained at snake bite, but no one turns up, it's almost wasted.
Wasted. And the thing is, I don't just look at doctors, I look at a lot of things that other people don't think about, and that's the nurses and the paramedics, because they're going to spend just as much time with that patient. And I have numerous paramedic friends who will phone me and say, look, I've got this and this person, they're in the vehicle, we're busy traveling to this and this place, these are the symptoms, what else can I do? And then I say, well, try this, do that, do that, do that. Don't go to that hospital, try this hospital because we have people there. And quite often they divert an ambulance to another place, which they're not supposed to, because they're supposed to go to the nearest hospital that has those facilities. But that hospital doesn't have an antivenom. It doesn't help me sending them there. So we've got that. Plus then you've got the nurse. So you don't end up with a nurse who's elevating the limb too high or putting ice on the wound. Or I've actually seen a nurse putting on a tourniquet a day after the patient arrived in hospital because she didn't know any better. So to get them to also be at the point where the patient is getting the best medical care, that we've got to look at the whole picture. And even in the clinics, you've got to explain to those people that, look, you can't help them in the clinic. You've got to transfer them to a hospital. And we had a case last week. This woman was running around in circles. She had put on 2 tourniquets already. It was Mozambique spitter bite. her leg was swelling, it was very painful, and she refused to go to the hospital. She wanted to go to the clinic because they know her there. And I'm explaining to her via somebody who's on the phone there that the clinic can't help you. And she goes, but those are the people I trust. And she went to the clinic, and I don't know what happened, but she probably lost her leg, just because that is what they are used to seeing. And it makes me sad that something like that should happen, because it could have been resolved so quickly just by traveling an hour more. She would have been fine.
So
it's a sad reality, unfortunately. And to kind of carry on your point, that you mentioned the paramedics, that is something that isn't really thought about, but they are the ones who are first on the scene. They're the ones, it's all great your doctor's being trained, but if your paramedics turn up and, like you say, they apply a tourniquet, or they don't know the signs to look for, they might take them to a clinic. So getting those first responders and not just focusing on one primary doctor is a fantastic resource, and if that can be spread further afield, the more lives will be saved.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, in the UK, you don't really have that problem because any hospital is within half an hour. Here, we sometimes looking at 3 to 4 hours to a hospital. So our paramedics have the patient for a longer period of time. And if they get to where he is or she is, and they pick him up and they see, but they've got a tourniquet on, or they've packed it in ice, or whatever they've done wrong, they can remedy it immediately instead of waiting until they get to the hospital, and then the doctor says, but you shouldn't have had a tourniquet on for the last 3 hours. So that's why I like looking at it holistically and trying to include as many people as possible. And recently I've been begging to get surgeons on the courses, because it's fine to get the person into the hospital and then they survive and then they get put into a ward, and the next day the surgeon comes past, has a look at this and goes, no, we need to operate, because that is what they're used to. And we see some horrendous scars on people that seriously should not have been operated on. So we try to get specific surgeons to go and check up on the patient, because we know that they're not going to just grab a scalpel. And we need more surgeons that are geared towards that. But the surgeons also, once again, hardly ever see snake bites. So when they're sometimes not sure who to approach, who do they speak to, who do they ask for advice. It doesn't help you phone a poison center where the person there's not a specialist in surgical matters, and they get the wrong advice, and then it's just a bad effect, which we actually didn't need in this country. We could have saved a lot more people, and we could have saved a lot more limbs.
It seems, it definitely seems like it's as you say, it's more of an issue of, I've just lost my words already. It's usually halfway into a monologue I do that. I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry, ignore me.
All right, so it's not useful when Ross loses it, just that he kind of keeps the conversation in flow.
Yeah. We'll just skip over it and carry on. Okay, there are some other things, especially you working with antivenoms, that we've actually got somebody who's now operating out of South Africa who's trying to make a specific antivenom made from snake blood. And so far the tests have been very positive on dogs. So there's so many people that are trying something new just to keep the prices down. But there are so many people who are still looking at, plants. And yes, if you rub this on or you tie this on, and I'm thinking, if we could put a plant on a wound and it would draw out the venom, I would advise every family to plant one in their garden. But the reality is that these things don't work. And putting it in a petri dish means nothing. I've seen how much research where they say, oh, but they've taken this and this plant, and they've taken the juice out of that, and they've put that on venom, and it neutralizes it in a petri dish. And I go, I can put toothpaste on it and I'll neutralize it. It doesn't mean that toothpaste is going to solve my problem, because to get the juice out of the plant and the venom into contact, I've got to inject it into that person. And that's what people don't understand, is that venom is spread through the body so quickly that anything topical is actually not going to work.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things we've had at LSTM is looking at the viscosity of venom and specific, and it was really interesting to see how it was working. And one of the things that you kind of begin to realize, especially working with spitting cobras, is how sticky the venom is. And if that gets onto a wound, it doesn't effectively need to be injected in because it will still be over the open wound. So unless you've washed it off, there's still a potential of it going into the wound. So it's that kind of topical idea. If you suddenly were to put something over the top of that, and there was still that drop of venom, especially cytotoxic venom, and it starts to go in, you're gonna have issues. Yeah, and even though venom does degrade quite quickly, it's something that we work on. So every extraction, as soon as it's extracted, it's covered and put into the freezer to slow any denaturing and then freeze dried. The venom is still active. Sorry, Karen.
We've had cases here of people decapitating a snake, and 2 or 3 days later they only get spiked by one of the fangs playing with it, and they still get really serious effects. So even though it denatures, it doesn't denature at such a rapid rate that it's not going to be worth anything in an orot. So if you get to put a bandage or something over a potential scrape or bite where there's cytotoxic venom, it's going to go trickling through there, and it's just going to carry on. And the reason why that the venom is so sticky is also got to do with because they spray the venom in your eyes, and they want it to stay there. And we get people here who, I got eye drops, and I'm going, eye drops are what, 0.5 milliliters? What's that going to help you? We're talking liters. We're not talking milliliters. We're talking liters of water that you require to flush your eyes out with. And no, but I got these drops, or I got an ointment, and I go, this isn't going to work. And some of the people, we do see some nasty effects from that, and it's unfortunate because it could have been avoided.
Definitely. And this idea of products being made and marketed as, for example, the snakebite kits where you've got the suction pump. And that's the exact response you usually get. They're marketed directly for people who are going to come into contact with snakebite, and if you weren't aware that they don't work, you're now in a position where you've got a product that says it will help with snakebite. It's the same as bite-proof gloves or kind of leg protectors. It gives you a false sense of security. And if you've got, say, the eye drops like you were saying there, if we were to get venom in our eyes at LSTM, I think we'd have about 4 or 5 saline bottles flushed through. We'd have a doctor watching us.
Saline burns, don't?
Saline burns, but so does venom.
What you can try is what we use Ringer's lactate, because the pH is not as bad, and it's very similar. But just normal water is probably the best thing, way quicker than saline. As long as it's just clean water, just liters of that, flush your eyes like crazy.
It's rather easy as well. Most people, especially in Europe, that keep spitting species, will be keeping them in their home, where they will have a tap which they can turn on and stick their head under, or a shower they can get under.
It's not that
all of our
easy.
snake rooms.
I've been spat in the eyes a few times too many, and to open your eyes is not easy. And when you open your eyes and it's something like saline which starts to burn, then you don't want to open your eyes. And the longer you wait, the worse it becomes. It's not fun. So to get somebody calm, what we do is we usually just put a drop of adrenaline in each eye. It seems to soothe it. And then we've got these nasal prongs that you use for oxygen. We put that across the bridge of the nose, and we run the water through that. So if you putting the patient on his back with his head tilted slightly backwards so he doesn't think that you're waterboarding him, and you run water through there, it forms 2 little pools in the eyes, and they start blinking, and as soon as they start blinking, it feels better, and the more they blink, the better it feels. And 10-15 minutes, and patients going, well, okay, I'm feeling a lot better. So it's little techniques that these people need to know if they're keeping spitting snakes, because a decent spray from something close up, especially things like the Negracinta and Negricollis as well, all of those are nasty, and it hurts. And to open some is very, very difficult. We've tried giving them analgesics, and we've had guys that are high on morphine and we still can't get their eyes open. So there's a few little tips and tricks. If you can do that, great. But I think in a place like in Liverpool, what they should do is look for these eye washers, which we have in all the mines and places where there's dust. So you put your face over it and it just sprays water directly onto your eyes. It's like a little basin and you put your head on it, and as you push down, it sprays water into your eyes. I think something like that would be a worthwhile investment.
It probably would, actually. Each room we've got eye wash stations, so they've got two bottles, litre each. So we have everything around, and to be honest, we probably would be sent over to the clinic that's across the road, or to the hospital that's just a bit further across the road. So we could
exactly.
There's a problem when you can't see.
Yeah.
I think even for private keepers, something like that, just knowing these little tricks of the trade, they're invaluable. And it's often overlooked. Like, I have an eye wash station. I keep spitting species. I have an eye wash station. However, as I say, I could go and stick my head under the tap. I've got a sink within 5 meters, maybe 10 max of the door of my snake room, but still I've got to get there. If I don't want to open my eyes, I've got to get there. So having something like this, as you say, this kind of mask, this eye wash mask thing that it's in the room that you can literally stick your head straight into, find and stick your head straight into, could save a lot of time and effort of stumbling around in immense pain, trying to find stuff, or even other. And it's just little things like that people never think of. Like, I'd have never thought of anything like that before you've just said it. Would have never done it. Never thought of it. Never even thought they were a thing. But now you've said it. Now it makes sense to implement that in what I do and what I keep. And I think that's part and the parcel of this podcast, is want people to not only understand the worldwide snake bite issues, but also people like yourself that have worked with snake bite and things around venom for 30 plus years. You've got these little tips that we can all learn from, and we can all implement into our own everyday today keeping, or if we live in an area where we know that there is spitting species, why don't we use a little bit of money, invest, and protect our families a little bit better, and help our families out a little bit better?
Yeah, the other mistake that people make with the spitting snakes is they forget that they're breathing in a lot of the fine dust particles of the venom. And I mean, we have probably close to a quarter of the people who keep spitting snakes are allergic to them, and you build up an allergy or sensitivity to that venom so fast, because you're breathing it in the whole time. It goes in through your nose, goes into your mouth. Even though it doesn't taste nice, it's not a big deal. I'm fairly lucky so far, touch wood, I've never had a reaction from it. But I know people who, if they walk into a room where there's a spitting snake, they'll already their throat starts closing and they need to take antihistamines. So generally in cases like that, wearing a full face shield is better than wearing glasses and all that. I can't work with a full face shield, and I can't work with a mask on. So I just tough it out and go for it. And so far, touch wood, I haven't had a problem. So because I don't have allergic tendencies, I should be okay. But there are people who don't realize they should wear a full face mask when working with these snakes. Not just the venom going in your eyes, it's the venom going onto your face, and then you can breathe it in.
Well, I personally use because I believed I had a venom allergy for a long time, and I actually use a respirator mask, like that people use for spraying cars.
Yes.
So I use a full face respirator mask whenever I'm dealing with the spitting species, and that includes cleaning the cages. And I wear gloves as well, and my arms are fully covered, my legs are fully covered whenever I'm working with spitting species as well. Just trying to make sure that I don't aggravate an issue that I've already got. However, I can be in the room with them without any adverse effects. It's just when I'm interacting with them, really.
I think the chances that you're allergic is fairly slight. I know it's probably the wrong advice to give someone, but if you could get a small drop of venom, put it on the inside of your arm and see what it does within the next 10 to 15 minutes. Does it become red and inflamed? Do you start feeling funny? Because even though that might trigger an allergic reaction or be the precursor to an allergic reaction, if you've got antihistamines or adrenaline on hand, that would help. But that will give you an idea of what's going to happen in the future. And if you are that sensitive, then possibly start thinking about not keeping those specific species. I keep the runkles, but I don't keep spitting cobras anymore because I'm just tired of getting sprayed on every time I open the cage.
Yeah, especially Nivricollis. We currently hold 9 Nivricollis, and we've got a few that as soon as you get them out, so in the rooms we'll always have safety glasses on, but we've got strong extractions. I think I think it's 15 minutes or 12 minutes. I can never remember the number, but the air in the room is replaced every set number. So the parts per million, we have to warn people before they come on a tour. Just as a safety note to say that there is part per million in the atmosphere and there's potential you're sensitized, but it's not happened. But you have to give them that warning. When we get the snakes out in the procedure room, if it's a spitting cobra, we're in a full face shield. Now, the full face shields are uncomfortable. You try and talk in them and your voice reflects back. It's not easy to work as a team, but it's not worth the risk for us. So it's one of those things that you kind of mitigating the dangers is worth the discomfort of wearing the face visor. They get very hot and sweaty, and when you're dealing with quite a few snakes at once, it's not enjoyable, but it's definitely worth it. You said yourself that you can't work in a mask or a face shield. That's a choice you've made, and you know the risks.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things you have to weigh up the risks for yourself. So if it got to the point Paul and I could not communicate effectively during extractions, for example, we always extract with 2 people in the room. Yeah. So if we couldn't communicate properly during an extraction with face shields on, that is now more of a risk to the both of us. So we'd have to find a way around that issue while still mitigating the dangers. And it's down to each individual to find what that medium is, where you've got the safety to protect you from the possibilities of the venom going in your face or in your eyes, and working safely without overdoing the protective gear, because that can have the negative effect.
Now, you'd probably have to look at some sort of microphone system or something. But I mean, we are getting to a point where we're trying to protect ourselves from everything, and then you see idiots who are free handling things like Nigerias, these Cape Cobras, and I think you even know how quickly you are going to die if that snake bites you. Mambas as well. We've got this one guy here who supposedly had a tame black mamba. Okay, put him in hospital twice, but he would let other people handle this thing. It was free handled. It was running around in his house, and I was going, is there something wrong with you? Because your common sense tells you these things are potentially dangerous. If the snake gets a fright and he bites me, he could kill me. Where if my retic gets cross and bites me, I'm going to end up with some blood on me. And there are just way too many people who think it's macho to free handle. And I have no time for them, nothing. If a free handler gets bitten, if he phones me, I'll help him out of decency, but I'm not going to go out of my way for him. Really, it's just, I can't believe that there are still people who are that stupid.
We know the risks. That's the thing. I see it as we know the risks. We know the potential that snake has. We can show you pictures of the venom effect, why take the additional risk for a cool picture? I never see the point. I personally don't ever feel the need to free handle. I'm more than confident enough with my hook that I'm safe. And for me, it's never been a showing off. It's always been a fascination. And I know that it differs throughout the hobby. People have different reasons for keeping, and that's each to their own. I personally wouldn't keep privately because I don't like the risk in my own house. I like my house to be the switch off when I come home from work. But if that's something you've chosen to do and you know the risk and you still go and free handle, you can say your snake is tame. All it takes is one thing to change. You might have the slightest scent of a rodent on your hand, and it picks it up, and suddenly there's a feeding response to this supposed tame snake. That feeding response might not be an aggressive bite, but it's still a bite, and it's still going to inject venom. So regardless of you saying, "Oh, I've domesticated a mamba," I would still, personally, I would never trust that snake, even if it had never bitten, never showed a mouth, was docile as anything. I would never trust that snake just in case something goes wrong. And if you're unfortunate enough to be just far enough that you can't get to the hospital in time, especially with something like neurotoxic venom from mambas, it's effectively a suicide note.
Yep. But yeah, we have some of them here as well, and we have some of these self-immunizers as well. Most of them are very, very quiet about it, but I have found out there are a few, and I can't understand why they would want to do it. They think they're doing something for science, but it's not. It's not for science. It's a macho thing, and it's really disappointing because then they show other people who see them as mentors and go, well, if they can do that, I can do it too. I should also try, and that's where we try to get the people that are in the hobby to at least be honest about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and to be responsible, not only towards yourself but towards anyone else that's around. Because I can promise you that the last thing you want is to drop your snake and have your 5-year-old blue-eyed daughter get bitten by something like a western diamondback rattlesnake because you were showing off. I doubt you would be able to live with yourself.
Yeah, it is that thought process of not just you. If you get bitten and you can't restrain the snake, and that snake is now loose, and someone else inadvertently walks in the room and is bitten because of your actions, it like you said, if it was your child, you would feel so guilty because it's your own fault. Why take that additional risk? Why open that Pandora's box effectively of danger just to show off? The self-immunizers, again, the issue with sorry, go on. Go on.
And it's not just your family. It's the people around you, isn't it? Hello, people there? Ed?
Yeah, they're here. Yeah, we were waiting for you to talk.
Oh, so I was talking. Yeah,
so it's the risk of people around you.
Yeah, it's the risk of people around you as well. If you have this animal that's non-native or anything like that as well, and you scare it and it darts off and it goes through a crevice in the wall and into the neighbour's house and bites the neighbour, and the neighbour didn't even know you've got that. They go to hospital thinking they've been bit by something, a local species, or in Europe maybe they don't even know what they've been bitten by. And then all of a sudden you've got a snakebite situation where not only have you got somebody who can't tell you what the species they've been bitten by is that the doctors don't even know how to treat it or what to treat because they've never seen a bite like that anyway. And it's just
the antivenom for that species isn't stored because they aren't aware that snake's in the country or that snake's a possibility. So the secretiveness is detrimental in the fact that you, especially for example, the UK, if you were keeping species that no one's aware you keep, and there's no antivenom, you're going to be in a tough situation where you then have to go to the hospital and say, look, I've been bitten by this, but no one knows I've got this. The snake's still loose in my house, and it's not fully secured. There's so many triggers that could be set off for the general public around you, and then the backlash towards the community that would happen because it'd be picked up by the tabloids. It's happened before, and they love a good snake bite story or a good, like, scary snake. It's something that always comes about. So you're hurting the people. Well, you've got the potential to damage people around you, damage the reputation of other more safer keepers, effectively, who go through the proper routes. It's such a knock-on effect down the line.
Yep.
Is it really worth it?
I had somebody in Australia get bitten by a snake which originates from South Africa, and I knew this guy. The snake didn't come from me, please. He got the snake from somebody else, and he contacted me and said, look, the snake has just bitten me, what do I do? And luckily it was a small horned Adabetus cordalis, so I could explain to him, look, try this, do this, do this, do this. And he went to a doctor, and the doctor keeps going back, they must test for antivenom. And eventually he said to the doctor, look, you can't, we've got a doctor-patient relationship, so you can't really say anything about this. The snake that bit me is not from Australia. And the guy said, oh, okay, well, that makes it different. What have you heard? The guy said, well, we've been told do this, do this, do this. And the guy survived, and his finger came through it without much damage. But in a place like that, it's the same as guys in the UK keeping something which they don't have on their license. It can become really, really bad. And if you get to a hospital and the doctor there is not as sympathetic as somewhere else, you could be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, definitely. And we always think that, like, a country like yourself is better equipped than say the UK for a lot of these things, but the reality of it is you're not, and especially for a non-native species, like a non-native species, you're probably can probably become quite serious very quickly.
We have no exotic antivenoms at any hospital in South Africa. They don't keep it. They don't see the reason for it. They don't import it. There are a few people who have it privately, and there's one or two of the zoos or snake parks that have, but they're not very eager to get rid of their stock because it takes weeks or months to replace it. And if one of their staff gets bitten in the meantime, then it's negligence because they didn't have it available. So it is one of those touchy subjects in South Africa. But I mean, we have tons of really bad stuff here. There's people here who've got taipans and king cobras and all this nasty stuff. And to date, nobody in South Africa has ever died or had a serious effect from any exotic venomous snake. And I think possibly by the time that people get to the exotic venomous snakes, they've already learned the rules of how not to get bitten. There are still people who get bitten. We get copperhead bites quite often. We get a lot of western diamondback bites because they're cheap snakes, and people give them away a lot easier than they would, for example, a taipan. Somebody who's got a taipan is not just going to sell it to any Tom, Dick, or Harry, where they look at some of these snakes and they think that it's not that dangerous. Trimerosaurus albolabris, these white-lipped tree vipers, they're not that dangerous. A serious bite from that is really, really nasty. I've seen a guy at death's doorstep from a tiny little Trimerosaurus. So it is one of those things you need to be aware of that as well. And South Africa just is not prepared for that, and then they're never going to be prepared for that because they just say, you knew the risk when you bought it. But now we've got the risk to the neighbor, and that's a lot of people don't think about. And that is why I stress to the people as far as possible, if you can, keep your snakes in a room which is separate from everywhere else, and it's got a double door and it's got a lock on it. We have too many people here with a rattlesnake in the lounge in a fish tank with a book on top of it and that sort of stuff.
That's very similar. If you look on any of the groups on Facebook, that's a very common occurrence in a lot of countries, not just South Africa, unfortunately. maybe not necessarily in the UK where we're meant to have a license for the species that we keep, for venomous species that we keep, but again, there is still probably people in the UK that even keep venomous snakes without a license in that kind of condition and that situation, and it's just dangerous. It's just downright dangerous for everybody involved. It's just a little bit stupid. So we've kind of moved off the main topics here as regards to, we've kind of sidetracked a little bit onto kind of maybe non-native venomous snakes to South Africa. So something we've mentioned a little bit on and we've touched a little bit on is could you kind of go through a little bit about some of the common mistakes that people are making once they've been bitten, and then some of the common mistakes that even professionals make, doctors and nurses make as well, regarding bite treatment?
Okay, obviously, the first one that pops up is tourniquets. That is just the bane of my existence, is people with tourniquets, especially these really thin ones, for example, a piece of wire tied around an arm and that sort of stuff. It just causes way too much tissue damage, and it's just crazy. Unless you get it on within probably seconds after a Cape Cobra or a black mamba bite, it has no purpose whatsoever to put on a tourniquet. So that's number one. Number two is people who start taking all sorts of medication, or for example, antihistamines, and then they start arriving at the hospital drowsy, and you don't know what the cause is. Is the drowsiness from the antihistamines? And so we have that sort of pre-hospital medication that they get, and then often when they get to the hospital, the doctors start injecting them with stuff which they actually shouldn't be injecting them. For example, corticosteroids and antihistamines and that sort of stuff. And then they're preparing them for antivenom, and some of the doctors know to give a pre-dose of adrenaline subcutaneously, but as soon as you give that with everything else that's on board, you're actually neutralizing it. So then when the person has an anaphylactic reaction, you've got to use that much more adrenaline to try and pull them right, and it becomes chaos. And it's not easy to treat under the best of circumstances, but under those circumstances, it becomes even worse. The other problem that we have is there's a large part of the population who, when they get bitten, they decide they're going to go lie down and see if anything happens. And then, 4 hours later, they arrive at the hospital, and by this time, they're already bleeding from the mouth and the nose, especially after things like a boomslang bite. And despite boomslangs supposedly only really becoming dangerous after many hours, we had a case last year where the guy had died within 4 hours, but also he took a long time to get to the hospital.
Well, this is actually that case we actually shared on the podcast Facebook page, and it got quite a lot of attention. Actually, it's that case in itself was quite extraordinary in a lot of ways, wasn't it? It wasn't necessarily things,
yeah,
and I think one of the main
of the story that I don't think were told. For example, I don't think anyone knows that the guy was known as the local snake catcher, and the snake that he caught was a sub-adult, wasn't quite an adult, and it was chewing on his thumb, and he was actually watching it, and then he took it off very slowly. This is what I heard from people who were with him when he got bitten, and then after that they only chopped up the snake, and he went to go lie down, and nobody can tell us exactly how many hours from the bite till his death. And we're assuming that he got bitten and went to the hospital. But when I spoke to one of the doctors who was there, he said, no, but this guy said he went to sleep. And then when he woke up, he was bleeding. So once again, we're talking 4 hours, but it might not have been 4 hours. And that was unfortunately one of the cases where we didn't have antivenom available. And the closest antivenom was about 6 hours drive. And we were busy rushing antivenom through and when they notified us and said, look, the guy didn't make it. So the ambulance turned around with the antivenom and came back. But that is a problem. Boomslang don't bite very easily. If you get bitten by one, you actually deserve it, because it won't be by accident. You would have either picked it up, tried to kill it, tried to catch it, whatever, and get bitten. So we don't have that many bites from boomslang, and the antivenom is very expensive. So not everyone keeps it in stock. So if you do have a serious boomslang bite, then it does become a problem. However, luckily we do have a good couple of hours on a boomslang, and usually the patient will pull through. But yeah, sometimes they go lie down, and sometimes they don't even wake up.
It's very interesting to hear that side of the story, because the case study that kind of popped up, and a lot of the time you'll see case studies of bites pop up in the UK. That's how we kind of view it.
Yeah.
And it was very vague. It was kind of, the gentleman had been bitten by a boomslang, and I think it said a potential of a second bite. So this is where, from our point of view in the UK, we're looking at this as, potentially there's a second bite. That could have been an issue. It says that, but then you're saying the snake was chewing, which definitely changes what we took as this.
Yeah, it bit him on the one hand, and as it pulled it off, it grabbed him on the other hand and started chewing there. That's what was told to me. And if I look at the early photographs I got some photographs from the hospital when it happened, and there were scrape marks all over, which is sometimes very difficult to see exactly what is going on, because this is a guy that works on a farm. He's got scrapes and scratches all over him, and there wasn't a specific site where there was massive bleeding. At that stage, just the black fingers were the things that were drawing the most attention.
It's very interesting to hear that. The summary at the bottom was saying about kind of issues of getting hold of antivenom, and how SAVP, you can, something like you could buy the boomslang monovalent or get it as an emergency, but then there's a huge price difference, and emergency drivers and stuff aren't there for the purpose of delivering antivenom. Now this, I'm not sure how it works. Like, you can give us more information on that.
Yes, you can get it from SAVP, the vaccine producers. So you can get it from them, but then you have to start paying to get it transported to you. If there's a flight going your way, then you pay for a courier to take it to the airport. At the airport, it's got to be put into a special hold, because it's got to be kept cold, and you've got to keep the cold chain all the way till it gets there. So that's what chases up the expenses, where if you can get somebody just to drive there, pick it up, put it in the car, and drive through to wherever it's required, then it's really not an issue, because it's not a scheduled medicine. We have had cases in the past where people have phoned them and said, look, I'll come and pick it up. You pick it up, you pay them, and the patient, in one case, patient's daughter drove through with the antivenom, and they gave it to him at 3:30 in the morning. In this case, what happened was he was in a state hospital, which is like your NHS. They're not private, and each province has its own budget and its own rules. And to cross from one province to another becomes a problem. So the one ambulance would have to ride up to the border, basically, and wait there, although there isn't really a border, and the next one would have to be there, collect it, and carry on. So it becomes, you have to play the political, logistical game to get the antivenom there, where if it was a private person, we could have even put it on a private plane and flown it to them if they needed it. So there are, unfortunately, these other challenges that we have in South Africa, because we have 9 provinces, and they don't really speak to each other, and there's state and private patients, and it becomes a bit of a mix-up.
We don't see all of this. We've been in so far removed from it, from day-to-day life. It's actually quite incredible to hear a lot of this. I didn't realise that they wouldn't, like, an ambulance wouldn't cross the border, the state line border, effectively. Like, that's
because it's a provincial. Yeah, because the provincial ambulance, all the insurance and everything only covers them while they are in that province. So to cross a border is not easy. It can be done, but then you need to get permission for it. And this was, I think this was on a Sunday night, if I'm not mistaken. So to get the permission to cross, it wasn't, isn't that easy to get, and it does become a problem. But in most cases, they basically just say, look, we need to cross this border, it's a medical emergency, and they say, right, go ahead. So we do get people from other provinces, for example, coming to where I am, just because we have the resources, and there's usually not an issue with it. They just pack them in the ambulance and off they go, but they need to get approval for it before the time. So we do have these little problems, and also we have the state hospitals, which are state-run, and if you go there, you pay a minimal amount depending on what your salary is. And then we've got private hospitals for people who have a medical aid, who pay every month very dearly for it. And in the event that they get bitten, they go to a private hospital, which can then run up bills of $500,000 at a time without a problem, because they know they'll get paid. In the state hospitals, they often don't have those resources, and you're sharing it with more people that may have come in with accidents, knife fights, whatever, all the other trauma that have come in, and you actually competing with them for attention.
That's
it's something we can't really imagine in the UK.
No, we struggle with it a little bit.
We're very lucky in the sense that we just turn up to the hospital. Yeah, you might wait a bit, but you're still going to get good care from the NHS. You will still be seen by doctors. You will get the care you need. With complaints, we might have like a 6-hour wait or something because your accident isn't major. But then you've got, when you compare it to the issues you'd face in South Africa, like you just explained, it's quite hard for us to relate to that. And then when we think about treating snakebite, it'd be seen as a priority. You'd get your ambulance straight in, you'd have your doctors, you would be quite a center of attention. But as you said, if you've got stabbing victims in, you've got gunshot victims who need the immediate attention to stop them from, for example, bleeding out, compared to having a few hours for a snakebite, you know where the priority will go. And then it does change the management, the treatment, and how you react.
Yeah, look, I mean, it doesn't happen often, but we do have cases where, for example, the patient gets told to fill out the form and just, sit here and wait. And when they call his name, they have a look and the guy's actually passed away. So it does happen. It doesn't happen that often, and we try our best to make it not happen. But in certain areas, it has been recorded, and unfortunately, that's what adds to the statistics, where if they had grabbed him when he arrived and said, look, this is a high priority patient, let's at least get some fluids in him, let's start with this, get some antivenom, get it from wherever, have it driven in, fly it in, whatever, and they give the guy the antivenom, he would survive. And then statistically, we would have less people dying of snakebite. And people often ask me, why do you help people with that? Why do you want to help people with snakebite? And everyone thinks I do it for the patient. And I actually upset someone the other day because he was like one of these real humanist type people, and he said to me, why do you do it? So I said, because I don't want people to hate snakes and kill them. And he looked at me and he said, and the patient? I said, I hope the patient survives. And they were upset with me, but that's actually where it starts, is I don't want people to think that a snake bite is a bad thing and that you're going to die. And the more people we can save, the better it is. And if you can educate them and say, well, don't go and kill the snake next time, because most of the time people are getting bitten while they're killing the snake. So if we can put the snake in a better light, less people will kill them, and less people who kill them, less people get bitten. We do still have, obviously, the accidents where people walk and they bump into a snake and they get bitten. Then, obviously, yes, I feel sorry for the patient as well, and I've never refused helping anybody, even if it's people that I know were looking for trouble. But yeah, we try and help them as far as possible, and if we can bring the statistics down, people are not going to see snakes as these bad animals, and probably conserve them a bit better.
Definitely, and one of the big things that a lot of snakebite initiatives are working on is the educational side. It's all good solving like a snakebite crisis, but if, as you say, people are still trying to kill the snake, you are putting yourself in that deadly zone. You're trying to, if you decapitate the snake's head and you don't know that it will bite afterwards, it's got the potential to bite afterwards, sorry. People will carry on trying to kill the snake. The idea that the myths around snakes. So teaching people that the snakes are there because there's a food source. They are doing a valuable resource to you because they're removing, for example, a rodent population you've got. You killing that snake may mean that further down the line you now lose your crop. And
Or
the
you
fact
get
that
some disease which the mice
yeah,
and rats brought, and then they defecate on your food and all that sort of stuff. So we do try and explain that to people as well. But unfortunately, we do have, like I said, we've got this one little nasty Mozambique spitting cobras who will go into a hut because obviously when it's hot, the doors and the windows are open. They'll go in there, they'll climb into bed with someone, and more often than not, it's children as well. And they will bite them 2 or 3 times. Why they do it, I have no idea. People have come up with 100 theories. I think they just like chewing on stuff. And unfortunately, they chew on children. And we see it every season. The patient comes in, he's all of 4 years old, was lying in bed, fast asleep, and woke up screaming, and they found a snake in the bed. We've had guys, one guy got bitten on the eyelid, and we've had one guy, actually, the worst one was shame, visited to South Africa, went to one of the game reserves, and he got up the morning, and while he was urinating, the snake struck at him from under the bowl, which was standing next to him, and actually bit him on his penis.
Oh
And
no!
Mozambique spitting bite there is the last thing that you want. But luckily, we managed to get him to a hospital quickly. He got antivenom, and that area of your body's got a very good blood supply. And even though it started looking quite bad, 2 weeks later he went back to Europe, and he had a fully functional, perfect-looking penis. So, yeah, sometimes it's bad. I mean, we see people that get bitten like that, and you think, wow, these are just horrible snakes. We must wipe them out. And then you think, but you can't wipe them out, because if you do that, then everything else is going to collapse. And you need to explain that to the same people. And if they've seen their child being bitten and what the trauma that the child goes through, they're going to want to kill every snake in that area. So you've got to explain to them that if you do that, more snakes are going to arrive. Where if you have snakes in the area that you know about, they will reduce the rats and mice, and you won't have that many snakes coming. So if you can, look after things like rock pythons and house snakes and mold snakes and the non-venomous ones, the venomous ones will not arrive there, or they'll get eaten up by things like fowl snakes. We try to get the people to put up owl boxes, because they reduce the rodents, plus they'll take out small snakes. And unfortunately in South Africa, owls are bringers of death. So if you put up an owl box, we've actually had it, they'll nail the owl box closed because the owls are going to bring death. So you have all these cultural problems as well, which you obviously are not going to have in Europe, but we have them in Africa, and you just have to work around it and try and explain to people that, look, they're there to do good as well. So take precautions, use mosquito nets, sleep under a mosquito net, put mesh over your windows, don't leave your doors open at night, all those sort of things. If you throw food out, don't throw it right outside wherever your dwelling is. Don't leave dog food out overnight, don't leave out water bowls. All these little things which people don't think about in cities, or more especially in the Western world. We have to explain that to people every day, because that's the reality. These snakes will come in, and it's not about them getting bitten by the snake. The snakes, some of these snakes actually go out to bite them, and it's always these damn Mozambique spitting cobras. So we seldom see it with other snakes. We've had one case, I think, or maybe 2, of a snouted cobra also doing that, but most of the time it's one species. And then, mamba bites, you would expect us to see hundreds of them. No, we don't see that many. In South Africa, we probably see 10, 15, 20 a year. And if you take the number of mambas we have in the country, you'd expect many more bites. And it just doesn't happen, because they're avoiding people. And you've got to teach people, don't go chase after the snake, don't try and kill it, don't try and catch it, don't go and catch it to sell it to the traditional healer, all that sort of stuff. And once we've gotten past that, the snakebite statistics will start to drop.
Definitely, they definitely will. And the interaction with the community is the invaluable part. It's like a grassroots movement. You've got to start at the bottom and build the trust. In India, I know a lot of the snakebite, well, not a lot. Some of the snakebite initiatives are working alongside faith healers, and you'll get people saying that's counterintuitive. But if you can get the faith healers on side and they get a snakebite victim who turns up and they can notice like ptosis, the drooping of the eyelids. They can turn around and say, look, this is beyond my skills. And it's not taking their business away from them. It's working alongside them, because if they have someone who dies on them, it looks bad.
Yeah.
So if you can get that distinction between, look, this is out of my hands, go to the hospital. You don't want to remove the faith healer. You don't want to remove the culture, because that's when people lose the trust in the help. You need to work alongside the culture and show that we're not, I say we as kind of Western snakebite initiatives, we're not trying to come in and take away your culture. We're not trying to change how you do things. We just need you to be aware that, yes, the faith healer could work. And the faith healer, if it's a dry bite, the faith healer works.
Yeah.
As far as they're aware, that's the faith healer's magic working. And if it means that we can get a source, an individual who knows a bit more about snakebite, so that people will still go to the faith healer, but the faith healer can turn around and say, that's out of my hands, you need to go to a hospital. They're more likely to listen to him than, say, if I turned up in the middle of India and just said, yeah, that bite's going to kill you, the faith healer can't do anything. Having that trust with the community will allow more information to be spread and more widely accepted.
And if the faith healer himself is the one that's calling the ambulance to say, listen, come and fetch this guy, it's out of my hands, it's beyond my expertise, please come and help. They'll start to go, but hang on, if we go to this guy and he can't help us, he will find help for us. So yes, let's go to him. And if he's properly trained to look for all these specific symptoms, or to be able to identify, just if they bring a piece of the snake with, to say, well, look, this looks like a black mamba. Black mambas do not give dry bites very easily. So I would suggest that let's get an ambulance here in a hurry, lie down. If you start struggling to breathe, let us know, just tap on our foot or something, and teach them a little bit about just even normal mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
Yeah.
And they can get the guy back into the vehicle and off he goes. And also, the faith healers are the guys that will say to them, okay, take off the tourniquet. You don't need a tourniquet, and I'm not going to put one on. We can maybe put this over the wound, or we must wash the wound, or whatever they want to use. That's fine. But we have good and bad traditional healers in South Africa. Some of them are sort of like more in the black arts, and it's like a typical witch doctor. And those are guys that are very difficult to work with. And then we've got the others which are more like a herbalist. And they're a lot easier to work with, and they seem to be more inclined to want to work with us in certain situations. I mean, I've done talks for the traditional healers locally. It's part of we do a venomous animal poisonous plants day, and their treatments are part of that day, because in some cases you get overdoses of the herbs and the medicines that they use. So, we see all of that as well. And to get these guys on your side is not that easy. We've also got, obviously, the racist problem in South Africa. They see well, not all, but they don't trust white people as much as what they do black people. So we need to have black people that go into the community and go, well, I'm from this community and I know this traditional healer, and I will teach him, and he must work together with us. Where if I go in there with my lily white face, they're going to look at me and go, no, not interested in what you do. You don't understand our culture. So that's another problem that we have specifically in South Africa, not so much in other parts of Africa, but in South Africa, there's no way around it. It's still a problem because of what has happened in the past, and that's unfortunately something we have to try to work with instead of against, because you can't force it on anyone. You've got to convince them that, almost to the point where they thought it was their idea.
It's something that LSTM have worked on quite a lot. I joined just after this had all kind of kicked off. They've set up a program called SIRS, or the Snakebite Emergency Response System, and the idea behind it is getting a specially designed motorcycle ambulance. So negate the issue that a lot of communities will find is that motorbikes are able to access it, but cars might not be. So it's a paramedic and a driver, and then it's towing a kind of like trailer that the patient can be lied down in. The paramedic can work on the patient while they're transporting to the hospital. And the way it works is through an app, a phone app, and it uses cellular networks. So there's people within the local communities who have a volunteer. I believe the program works off volunteers, and they're a community health volunteer, and they get some extra training. They'll have a smartphone with the app on, and if there's a bite, they go to the community health volunteer. And on the app, it's got the snakes, so pictures of the snakes, so it helps you identify them. And once that information has been entered in, it's sent to the nearest hospital that has got the appropriate antivenom. It alerts them that there's been a bite. It sends out the alert for the motorcycle ambulance, which will then go to the location. So they've got life-saving equipment, say a ventilator for a neurotoxic bite. So they can go deep. Well, they can go deeper into communities than normal vehicles can. And by using the community health volunteer, you can get that additional training and trust within the community to go to them, and they will then get the ambulance to come to you instead of having to find a way to get hold of a vehicle to then transport to a hospital to then be sent to another one. It gets rid of the guesswork. It alerts a hospital there's been a bite. It alerts a paramedic to come out. It gets the antivenom ready, and the doctors at the facility can then prepare themselves for a bite. And instead of the victim just turning up saying, "Oh, it was bitten, so and so was bitten 4 hours ago by a black snake," they can say, "An hour ago there was a bite from what has been seen as a nitrocrolis, for example. So that was an hour ago. We now know that it's coming directly to us. We've got the antivenom." That extra bit of time allows for more preparation, and the more prepared you are, hopefully the more lives are saved. And I know that it's currently being trialed. So I think it's a 3-year trial. And if that's successful, they can roll it out further and further afield. And it's not just designed for snakebite. They know that it will be used for other purposes, but that's, if you can get the community on board, the additional lives saved will be invaluable.
Yeah, the thing is to get a little trailer that's got enough equipment on it to be able to resuscitate a patient after a serious neurotoxic bite is going to be a challenge on its own. I was in Kenya, I think, last year. We were invited over by the Minister of Health to come and do some training there. And I went to the second biggest hospital that they had, and I had a look inside their ambulance, and I had more equipment in my first aid bag than what they had in the back of the ambulance. And they only had the 2 ambulances, and the rest were motorbikes. And they go fetch a patient, and he has to hang on, and they leave their way through traffic. So to get something that fancy into all the communities is going to be very expensive. And let's hope it. Look, we'd love it to happen, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of donor money, because most of the government departments through the whole of Africa just do not have the money to be able to put something like that into place, and then still train the people and get drivers that we know are reliable, and getting paramedics trained to the point that they can deal with everything from childbirth to traumatic injury to snakebite, everything, and still balance them on the back of a motorbike. So it sounds good, and I really hope it works, but there's a lot of other education that needs to be done before we
definitely
think that we've now found the answer. Just once again, starting at the top and working our way down, we'd have to look at the doctors and convince them not to do things like fasciotomies, and not to do bride within 4 days, and all this sort of stuff, which still happens every day. And when you speak to them, they say, but that's what we needed. And I've actually had patients that I've advised them to book themselves out of hospitals. I know it's probably wrong, and if something went wrong, I'd have to explain myself in court and more than likely go to jail. But in some cases, I could see that these people were going to get badly cut to pieces when it wasn't required. And not one of those people that I ever advised to either change hospitals or leave hospital had any serious effects, where they would have had if they'd stayed in that specific hospital. So we had it, I think it was 3 weeks ago. I said to one guy, well, look, you need to get out of that hospital and you need to go to this hospital. And he said, okay, fine. And he booked himself out, and they wouldn't give him an ambulance, obviously, because he had refused hospital treatment. He put his child in the back of the car and he drove through. It wasn't that far, it was maybe 3/4 of an hour drive. Got to that hospital, they were waiting for him, they admitted the child, treated him, and 3 days later the child went home with no scars, nothing wrong. Where at the first hospital they were preparing him for surgery and they were going to cut the entire leg open, and eventually he left with no injuries. So you've got that problem, and then you've got your nursing personnel which need to be able to look after the patient and check, for example, make sure the drips don't run dry, because you need to make sure that the urine output is brisk, otherwise you've got problems with the toxins circulating through the body. And they must also look for relapses. They must explain to the patient about serum sickness, and all of those things. Your paramedics have to be really clued up as well, so they can see when the patient's going to vomit, get some suction, start suctioning the patient, turn him on his side, all that sort of stuff. Elevate the bitten limb just slightly, not too high, don't go and cool it down. All these sort of things right the way through, and then we've got to go to the community. And all of this takes money and it takes time. And it sounds nasty, but a lot of the people who are involved in this in South Africa are sort of later on in life. And I think in probably 20 years, unless somebody else steps up soon, a lot of the skills that we've learned over time we lost. And we need new people who are enthusiastic to get into this field.
Yeah, and I think that's the same. That statement there is very similar across the board. I think the new generation coming through, or the next generation coming through, doesn't seem to be have the information set or the knowledge set just yet to take over from the people like yourself who have been doing it for years. However, we are seeing. I think it may be from doing this podcast, I don't know, but I think we are seeing a new set of generation where one of the hosts on here, Tim, he's currently doing his his medical training, but he wants to specialize in purely in snake bites in Europe and stuff, and some of the snake bite situations that we sometimes see in Europe from non-native species and stuff. So there is odd people that are coming through, but not that many. Unfortunately, I've just seen the time, and we are an hour and 40 minutes into recording, and it's 10 p.m. your time and 9:05 our time, and I've still got to get some food. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming on. This has genuinely been really eye-opening, and some of the information you've put forward has been absolutely incredible. I don't think we could have asked for it to go.
It's been a great pleasure, and really, if only one person's life or limb is saved as a result of me giving up an hour and a little bit of my time, then it was time well spent.
No, 100% agree, and that's one thing that we were trying to do as a podcast. Is we're saying if one person learns one technique that can help them save their lives, or one person or somebody is able to give a little bit of time to an initiative or help out in some way, shape or form, even if that's just one person from all the episodes we do, it's well worth it, well and truly worth it.
And the other point is, if we can get people more interested in snakebite, they might have an interest to follow it on as a career. I personally didn't really know about snakebite until I got my job. And now I'm in this position where I can share information because I see it. And if we can get this more openly spread, because snakebite isn't well known about, it might bring about the next generation, or start the idea for the next generation to follow on, as you're saying, to get those skills, to pick up that information, that knowledge.
Yeah, definitely, and it's such a great thing, and seeing the feedback we're getting, and then getting guests like yourself on who are well respected, it's making this more and more worthwhile for us every single time. So thank you so much for coming on. I genuinely cannot thank you enough for that. So, and I'd just like to, again, as normal, thank our listeners for listening to the show. I hope you've had a great time, and thank you very much for listening.